Do you suffer from MTA? Music theory anxiety. Thousands of guitarists suffer from this self-defeating condition. But it doesn't have to be that way. There's a lot less to learn than you think, and it's not as hard as you think either. Most important, you already know a lot more than you realize. I'm Dr. George, and I'm here to provide the cure for MTA. So a little bit about me. I have 3 degrees in music theory and spent 30 years teaching both classical and jazz theory at universities. Over the years, I've learned 2 really important things. First, there's a lot you don't need to know. The reason music theory seems complicated is that a theory needs to account for everything to be valid, and that's what's taught in colleges. But you don't need all of that to play jazz guitar. And second, while it might seem complicated on the surface, if you dig a little deeper, it becomes much simpler. So in this video, in just under 15 minutes, I'm going to show you all the theory you need to know to play jazz guitar. But first, let's look at a couple of misconceptions. One thing people with MTA will say is, you don't really need theory because some famous guitarists didn't need it. Well, and you're right, if you're famous. But for the rest of us, it makes things easier. First, it provides labels for common concepts. It makes them easier to remember. Chord symbols, for instance, a lot easier than thinking of the individual notes for every chord. It also makes it easier to transfer what you know across the neck. Now, you probably know the minor pentatonic scale in more than one key and position. You didn't have to relearn the scale for each key. Third, it makes it easier to figure things out by reducing the number of logical choices. If I play a D minor 7 and a G7, we know from theory that there are only so many things that can happen next. So even if you're guessing, it's an educated guess. The other misconception is about music notation. Like theory, it's not 100% necessary, but I'm reasonably sure that you can read and write your native language. So why would you choose to be illiterate when it comes to music? Notation makes theory easier to understand. Compare a triad on the staff to the letter names. The relationship is pretty clear in notation, and it's immediately identifiable. Now, the other thing that notation gives us is it makes it easier to communicate with other musicians. Now, we're not talking about sight reading here. We're just talking about being able to look at a piece of music and know what it means. At the most basic level, what theory does is provides labels for things, most of which you already know. We know that as a C major scale. That's one thing rather than 7 individual notes. See, these are the fundamentals of music, the facts of music. Every discipline has them. In math, there's the multiplication tables, addition, subtraction. There's a theoretical basis for them, but it's easier to just accept that 2 plus 2 equals 4. So don't waste time worrying about the why of these things in music either. So these are the basics in the order in which you should learn them. Whole steps and half steps, then note names, including sharps and flats, how to construct a major scale, intervals, key signatures in the circle of fifths, minor scales, major and minor pentatonic scales, triad types and how to spell them, and 7th chord types and how to spell them. And by the way, you're also going to want to be able to hear these too. Now, you probably know a lot of this, but if you have some gaps or could use a refresher, I have a mini course available made specifically for guitarists. Practical Theory for Guitarists covers all the fundamentals and applies them to the guitar, not the piano. You get 16 lessons with videos, PDFs, and exercises, and you'll also be part of the community where you can ask questions and leave comments. The course is regularly $29, but as a special offer for my YouTube viewers, you can get the course for just $10. See the details in the description below. What most people call theory is actually harmony, and because of that, where it really comes into play most is when we play chords. So let's start with the diatonic chords in major. For triads, we stack thirds on each note in the scale, and the result is major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, and diminished. If we add another third, we get the 7th chords, which is what we use most in jazz. We label these chords with numbers, usually Roman, but you can use Arabic if you're from Nashville. The pattern is the same in every key, so once you know it, you know it. And it means that I can say, play 1-6-2-5 in the key of G, and you'll know the progression. And that progression is one thing, not four, which makes it easier to remember. People are often intimidated by jazz chords with names like C9 flat 13 or B major 7 sharp 11, but they're really just the three remaining notes from the scale. We call them 9, 11, and 13, but they're really just 2, 4, and 6. And you can add them to almost any chord. Now, you may have heard of avoid notes, but it's really only 11th on major chords where that clashes with the chord sound. Sharp 11's okay. And flat 9 on minor chords doesn't sound so good either. And no, extensions don't need to be an octave above. The notes can be in any order. Now, the diatonic chords in minor are almost the same as the relative major, just in a different order. To create a stronger resolution to the tonic, we raise the third of the 5/7 chord. That's the major seventh of the key. And then while it's possible to raise that note in all the chords that have it, we generally don't. It's also common in minor to use the minor 6 chord as the 1 chord. Once again, it gives it a stronger sense of tonic and helps differentiate from the mode and the relative major scale. Secondary dominants are the most common non-diatonic chords. They're dominant sevenths on diatonic roots, substituting for the diatonic chord. For most, we just raise the third. The exception is the 5/7-4, which is the only diatonic major chord that has a secondary dominant. In theory, secondary dominants are usually called 5/7 of the target chord, so 5/7 of 2, 5/7 of 3. But for practical purposes, it's sometimes easier to just think of them as being 2/7 or 6/7. Diminished seventh chords can seem pretty mysterious, but most of the time, they're just rootless dominants on chromatic roots. It's most common to use them as passing chords. Now, some of you may know that any of the notes can be the root. And if you move the chord up or down 3 frets, it's the same chord. The famous damsel in distress progression. So it also means it can be 4 rootless 7 flat 9 chords. So if you're thinking C sharp diminished, it's A7 flat. Think E diminished and it's C7. Thinking G diminished, it'll be E flat 7, and B flat diminished will be G flat 7. Now that opens up a whole can of worms that I'll address in another video. There's one other type of chord that functions as a secondary dominant, tritone subs. A tritone sub is a dominant 7th chord with a root a tritone away. Now you can see that the notes on the 3rd and 4th string don't change. So what these chords do is create chromatic root movements. Now the tensions of the two chords reverse. The top 4 notes of a D flat 9 chord are the same as G7 sharp 5 flat 9, or altered for short. So these are essentially the same chord, just with a different root. And if you're playing with a bass player, you don't really care which we call it. Now when you're soloing on this, you can use the melodic minor scale for both of these. For more on this, check out this video. Diatonic chords are grouped into 3 basic functions: tonic, subdominant, and dominant. In the tonic group are the 1 chords, major 7 and major 6, 6 minor 7, and 3 minor 7. In the subdominant group, we have the 4 major 7 and 4 6, and the 2 minor 7 chord. And then in the dominant group, we have the 5/7 chord and the 7 minor 7 flat 5. The other chords in each group can sub for the main chord, so 6 or 3 can substitute for 1, 2 substitutes for 4. We don't usually use the 7 to substitute for the 5 chord. However, when we're thinking about voicings, that comes into play. Now, the reverse is only true sometimes. Now, this is especially useful when we're playing no root chords, as it easily expands all the possible voicings. Now, there's one other group of chords that are used in many songs. Subdominant minor chords are borrowed from the parallel minor. That includes 4 minor 7, 4 minor 6, 2 minor 7 flat 5, flat 7 7, and flat 6 major 7. Flat 2 major 7 is usually included in the group as well. Here are some examples. In the song Misty, you have what we call a backdoor cadence. In the song Night and Day, it starts out on a borrowed chord, either a flat 6 major 7, or the 2 minor 7 flat 5. And then a popular turnaround is from Lady Bird. While many songs can and should be analyzed in one key, many others will move through 2 or more keys. 3 common ways that we modulate are using direct modulations, a change of mode, or using a 2-5-1. The A section of Body and Soul is in D flat, but at the end of the second A, after resolving to 1, it immediately goes to a 5 chord in the key of D major. A great example of how the 2-5-1 is used is found in All the Things You Are. It starts with a circle progression in F minor. But after the D flat chord, it goes to a 2-5-1 into the key of C major. And then a change of mode to C minor and another circle progression, concluding with a 2-5-1 into G major, but this time using a borrowed 2 minor 7 flat 5. There's one more area of theory we need to look at: structure, or how the songs are put together. Now, there are many variations on form. The most common would be AABA. And that's where we have an A section that's repeated with usually a slightly different ending, then followed by a bridge, and then another A section. Most of the time, those sections are going to be 8 bars long, but they can be longer or shorter. Some common examples would be I Got Rhythm or Girl from Ipanema. Now, the next most common form is ABAC. And so we have an A section followed by a contrasting section, another A section followed by a concluding section. Common examples would be Fly Me to the Moon or All of Me. There are a lot of other forms used, though. In Autumn Leaves, the form is AABC. And then there are extended forms like I'll Remember April, which has 3 16-bar sections. And some songs are just through composed, like Stella by Starlight, where each section is different. Of course, there's one other form that we can't neglect, and that's the blues, and that's been around for a long time. So one more thing I'd like to mention, and that is the terms verse and chorus have a different meaning than they did in Tin Pan Alley days. Many of these songs were from musicals, and the verse was the introduction to the song. It's often kind of slow and conversational. You might be familiar with the verse from Tony Bennett's I Left My Heart in San Francisco. The chorus is what we generally think of being the song. One chorus is one time through the main body of the song. So when somebody tells you to take a couple of choruses, they mean solo over the form twice. I'm sure this seems like a lot, but you can learn all of it in the course of learning tunes. By the time you've learned 10 tunes, you'll have learned all of the concepts you need to play just about any tune. But you need to learn the tunes in the right order so that each one is a small step forward instead of a giant leap. A great place to start is the blues. It's at the heart of jazz, and everything I've talked about can be found in one variation of the blues or another. Don't believe me? Check out this video.